Hi everyone, welcome back to Coffee, Books, and Rain, where we have two of the three today because we have coffee and books, but sadly, no rain. I actually put on makeup thinking I was going to go do stuff today, never left the house. I piddled around the house, I did some baking, and I took out the trash. Oh, and I did my roots because now they are done and shiny and happy-go-lucky me. But anyway, we're not talking about hair and all that sort of stuff. We are talking about books. And this particular book I ran across is called Exit Zero Stories by Marie-Helene Bertino. And it was very interesting in my personal thoughts because I wasn't certain what I was going to be diving into when I requested this from NetGalley, other than the fact that it was going to be kind of like 12 short stories. And so I was like, okay, that sounds cool. That sounds fair. It does get kind of weird. And let me dive into the summary first before we dive into some of my thoughts. So, all right. 12 delightfully strange, haunting stories from the acclaimed ocular author. It does say ocular. I'm not sure about that. Author of Beautyland. Not sure about Beautyland either. Death-shaped entities with all their humor and strangeness haunt the 12 stories in Exit Zero. Vampires, ghost girls, fathers, blank spaces, day-old peaches, and famous paintings all pierce through their world into ours, reminding us to pay attention and look alive, and offering many other flashes of wisdom from the oracle and author of Beautyland by Marie-Helene Bertino. And that's all the summary we've got. It is considered short stories, fiction, literary fiction, horror, and fantasy. Now, it's only, and I want to say actually, I had the audiobook, which was maybe about 5 hours and 45 minutes. It was somewhere around in there. And so it does look like it's only about 200 pages in paperback. It is expected publication on April 22nd of 2025. And it looks as though Marie-Helene Bertino was born and raised in Philadelphia. And I am going to look up Beautyland because I don't know what that is. But let's just look that up real quick while I'm sitting here. Beautyland. Okay, it's a novel. All right, an alien sent to Earth as a baby to assess its habitability. Okay, and so it was written in 2024. I may quickly put a cover somewhere on the screen just to show you what Beautyland looks like, because I didn't read that prior to reading this. But this book is very interesting in a lot of different ways, and it feels a lot like experimental writing in a lot of different ways, because some of these stories, in my personal opinion, from me reading it, didn't make a lot of sense. And since I was audiobooking it and they don't tell me clearly the distinction between the end of one and the beginning of the next, I was a little confused for a period of time. And so it's definitely some creative writing, some free writing, some creative thinking, because these stories don't feel connected to each other. They feel a little flowy, like the author wanted to play with topics in whatever way they wanted. And that's fine. I just was unprepared for that type of writing and that type of listening, because I was very confused for probably the first hour of what I had gotten myself into. But the more I got into the stories, the more interested I became in the way she wove these stories. So one of the first ones, and it's not maybe the first one, because the first one was very odd, and I'm having trouble remembering what that one was about, but I think it was about someone's father. Well, the second one is also about someone's father who passes away, and he leaves all his leftover possessions to his daughter, and they've been estranged for a while, and one of the things that she gets left is a unicorn. And so that's a very interesting story because, of course, the daughter is not really sure how to care for a unicorn. A zookeeper offers to help her with the unicorn. And again, very short story, but interesting because the character development happens within those few short pages. And at the end of it, I didn't even realize I was at the end because it felt like the story needed a little bit more. And I guess that's where we as the reader are able to create kind of our own whatever continues, what happens at the end of those pages. I do enjoy that sometimes, but I also like knowing what the author plans for these characters as well. These characters are inhabitants of the authors. They are creatures and sons and daughters of the authors who create them. And so I like when the author is able to give us some sort of afterword or epilogue, if you will, to tell us what happens when the official story is done. And I think that's also something that people kind of question with regards to, let's say, princess movies in the Disney realm, is what happens after the happy ending. I mean, is it really possible that all of these princesses and princes, or these maidens and princes, or what have you, depending on the dynamic, that they stay happily ever after married? Because in the Disney realm, we expect maybe they do. In reality, and possibly in the Grimm's fairy tale, they don't. So wherever their origin was, like, it's really touch and go as to whether they live happily ever after. One of the other stories that I thought was very interesting is there are some haunted peaches, which says more about not so much the ghost and the peaches, but as the wife of the wife in a married couple situation, because she is, in my personal thoughts, kind of nightmare. And so if this was a particular scenario that kind of broke the camel's back with regards to their relationship, then she's just kind of terrible. And I really had no sympathy for her, even by the end of the story. I was just like, gosh, okay, maybe that guy is much better off. Then we get to a story about this old woman, and she does sound like she's about 70-ish years old. She seems to babysit a kid named Pumpkin, and she hops into a cab one day after her divorce is getting processed, and she's kind of like feeling like she's finally free. She's now single after what feels like the marriage was fine until her husband came home and was like, oh, by the way, I'm moving in with my girlfriend, deuces. And she's like, oh, okay, fine. Apparently not a lot of like real concern regarding that. And so it feels like their wedding or their marriage was more or less performatory. Well, she gets into a cab after leaving this divorce sort of hearing, and there's another woman in the cab who is talking on the phone, and she's like, yeah, it's fine, come on in. And she just like lets our divorcee into the cab with her. So it's like the driver and the two women in the back. And ultimately they get in a car accident. Someone T-bones this cab, and now our divorcee has accidentally gained a fairly expensive painting. She does try to do the right thing by taking it to the art gallery that the other lady was going to bring it to. However, they kind of brush her off, and so she goes on about her way, and then her mind seems to slowly deteriorate through the end of the story. And so in my personal thoughts, I was like, oh no, was it the accident? Was she more injured? Because I do think that's kind of one of those things. If you have a head injury, you may not present with being, like, you may present as being fine, but anything with the head injury or anything like that, or maybe internal bleeding of any kind, you probably want a more extensive checkout than just, like, leaving the hospital and trying to go home. But the stories were very interesting, and I was kind of felt pulled back and forth a little bit with regards to these topics, because some of them felt like what I call slice of life, like the little old lady with the painting. I think the one with the ghost girl and the peaches was kind of horror, and then I think the one with the unicorn was also kind of dealing with trauma, but a little bit of fantastical as well. So I get to see that these stories are a little bit of everything. They are kind of all mixed up. And I was like, okay. I do enjoy it though. I did enjoy it and was very interested to kind of know more about this author's writing. I had a class in college, and pretty much the entire sorry, Argos is playing, and he went woof at me, just because he's having a pretty good time over there. But I had a class in college, and pretty much the entire class was a study of a writer called Don DeLillo. And I had never heard of that author before, but after that author study, pretty much, I have not read his books since, even though I think one or two of his books got turned into movies. And I know Robert Pattinson was in one of them, because I did try to watch that one and it was weird. But it was weird when I read it. Again, a very kind of what I would call cerebral, experimental writing sort of book. But that's what this author also felt like. It felt like just a different exploration into the things, making the everyday more surreal, adding those surreal elements to make it a little bit more fantastical, and not mad about it at all, because sometimes we need to find the surreal in the everyday, and I think reading it in this way kind of helped do that. I am not this type of writer that writes in this experimental sort of way. If I were going to say what kind of writer I am, I started off writing a whole bunch of poetry back in high school and college, but now I would say I write fiction fantasy. It's not romance, it's not romantasy, it's kind of fiction fantasy with like hints of myth, legend, and some slice of life, everyday hero sort of situations as well. But it doesn't mean I don't enjoy reading it. And that is what we come here for, is to talk about books that are surprisingly enjoyable to read or listen to. So I am going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I don't want to talk about all of these short stories. They can be a little difficult to read or listen to, just if you are not kind of used to this type of writing. It can feel disjointed, but if you can open your mind to the possibility of writing being playful, fun, but also exploring topics in different ways and not presenting characters that are always enjoyable, then this could be a really good book to dive into, since it is just 12 short stories. But I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you have not liked and subscribed already, then I certainly hope you will. And with all of that being said, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey. I will see you all on the next page. Have a great one. Bye.